President Biden this week will announce his long-awaited task force to reunite migrant families separated at the border. The president is expected to also announce executive actions focused on refugee resettlement and asylum in the U.S. But the new administration's efforts to undo Trump-era policies have stalled. CBS News reports many of the former president's border rules remain in place, leaving thousands of asylum seekers stranded or facing expulsions. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. So, Camilo, you have some new reporting out today on how U.S. border policy has changed and not changed, really, under the new administration. Tell us more about it, about the policy specifically asylum seekers and migrants are encountering once they get here to the United States, especially during the pandemic.
Yes, good morning, Vlad. During the campaign, President Biden strongly denounced Mr. Trump's border policies, accusing the previous administration of forcing asylum seekers to live in dangerous conditions and in squalor on the other side of the Rio Grande. Mr. Biden, since taking office, has suspended the so-called Remain in Mexico asylum program, and he's set to formally end the policy this week through an executive order that will change how border officials process migrants and asylum seekers going forward. However, the Biden administration has yet to say, Vlad, what they will do with the estimated 20,000 asylum seekers currently waiting in Mexico with pending asylum cases. Will they allow these asylum seekers to continue their immigration proceedings in the U.S.? That is still unclear. In addition to that, the Biden administration has continued to use a Trump-era CDC policy to rapidly expel migrants and asylum seekers, including families with children, without allowing them to request U.S. humanitarian refuge. And this policy was one that was authorized by the CDC last spring under the premise that if the U.S. allows migrants to come into the U.S. during the pandemic, they may spread the coronavirus inside immigration detention centers and broader border communities.
When this policy, this Remain in Mexico policy, was first put in place, you spoke to us about what families were enduring as they waited for permission to cross into the U.S. to ask for asylum. But that was before there was a pandemic. You've spoken to families who are waiting now. What is life like for them? And are they hopeful that their fortunes might improve?
Well, I'll give you one example, Anne-Marie. I spoke with an asylum-seeking grandmother from Nicaragua who fled political persecution in her home country because she was opposed through the ruling government there that has been accused by the Trump administration and the Biden administration of committing human rights abuses. And so she has been staying with her granddaughters and her daughter in Matamoros, Mexico for nearly a year and a half. They've been living in a tent on the other side of the U.S.-Mexico border waiting for their asylum case to be adjudicated. But asylum hearings during the pandemic have been postponed indefinitely, so they don't know when they're going to get a decision on their cases. And while they wait, they have to wait in one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico, in a state that the U.S. State Department actually warns Americans not to visit because of the rampant crime and violence there. So that is a predicament that many of these asylum seekers currently find themselves in. They are right now in a state of limbo. Many of them are hopeful that things will change under this current administration, which has pledged to implement more welcoming policies towards asylum seekers. But at this point right now, Anne-Marie and Vlad, many of them hope their fortunes will change, but it's still unclear when and if that will happen.
So, Camilo, President Biden is set to issue several executive orders on immigration tomorrow, including one addressing the processing of migrants and asylum seekers along the border. What can we expect?
Sure. So we expect this executive order to formally end the Remain in Mexico policy. It will also terminate several agreements that the Trump administration brokered with the three countries in Central America's Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, that allowed U.S. border officials to send asylum seekers to those countries and have them seek asylum there instead of here in the U.S. Those agreements will be scrapped under this order. The order is also expected to, as you said, recalibrate U.S. efforts at the U.S.-Mexico border and reshape how border officials will process migrants going forward. So there are still a lot of open questions about what will happen to, again, the asylum seekers waiting in Mexico and to this expulsion policy that was authorized by the CDC. That is still unclear. But we also expect, as you mentioned earlier on in the segment, that one of these executive orders will create a task force for the families who remain separated after their separation during the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy.
Yeah, President Biden has made that a priority, bringing these families back together. But, we've listened to your reporting over the last year or so about just how messy the whole situation has been, how there's a lack of documentation, how, in some cases parents were deported and their children are still here. What are some of the challenges that President Biden is expected to face with this task force that is supposed to be focused on reuniting families?
Well, remember, Anne-Marie, that this court case surrounding family separations goes back to 2018, and advocates and lawyers have been spending years trying to find all the families that were separated under these policies and previous pilot programs that the Trump administration implemented before expanding zero tolerance across the entire border. Right now, they still have not located more than 600 parents. They have outdated phone numbers from the government that don't work anymore. The addresses on file are not helping them, and they are right now on the ground in these Central American countries trying to locate these parents through addresses of family members and other leads, because that's the only way now that they can find these quote-unquote unreachable parents. And so it will be important for us to see what the Biden administration will offer in terms of help to these groups. Will it offer State Department resources, for example, to help these groups locate these parents in Central America? And another big question is to the families who are still here, because even though many of those families were reunited here on American soil, all of them are facing deportation because they lack legal status. The only way they can stop that deportation is if they obtain asylum. Will the Biden administration offer these families some sort of legal status to redress the damage caused by the Trump administration to their children and to these families?
So Republicans have criticized the president's immigration agenda. Some are arguing that it encourages more illegal migration. Texas has already convinced a judge to block the administration's deportation moratorium. So what sort of opposition can we expect going forward, and could it derail the president's immigration agenda?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it has already derailed one of his key immigration campaign promises, which was to freeze deportations for his first 100 days. That has been suspended by a judge in Texas after the state filed a lawsuit arguing that this policy was illegal and that it could harm Texas because undocumented immigrants would be released in the state and would require social services and the like. That policy has been blocked, and states like Arizona have already also threatened to sue the Biden administration if it continues to implement these campaign pledges on immigration. So I think we can expect many of these lawsuits to occur in the coming weeks. And another area of opposition is in Congress. I think we will see opposition from Republicans to Mr. Biden's proposal to place the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. on a pathway to U.S. citizenship, because Mr. Biden's proposal, as it stands right now, Vlad and Emery, does not contain many immigration enforcement components that have typically been seen as key to garnering Republican support. So it's important for us just to monitor that in the coming weeks.
All right, Camilo, always good talking to you. Thank you so much.